here it is. The whole grounds for this is because they saw what appeared to be marijuana. And, you know, last I checked, that's a ticketable offense. And for them to basically be so gung-ho about this and just want to basically escalate a situation, turn it into something that it doesn't have to be, you saw that that's what they wanted. That's what they were prepared for. And, you know, before I even go any further into listening into this, you know, it really is textbook how law enforcement creates situations in which there is going to be danger. There's going to be what they would consider to be justifiable escalation, you know, of a situation. So here it is, a ticketable offense now turns into something where you've got an officer trying to place a person in a headlock. I know police apologists, law enforcement apologists, first thing they're going to go for is just try to say, well, why didn't he just comply? And what they have essentially done is make sure that we don't know that answer. Because you're talking about someone that has had some run-ins with law enforcement, as many of us, including myself, have had. So when I see that familiar officer, I kind of know what I know what's coming. You know what I mean? And the same thing with him, but maybe that's why he fought, because he knew what was coming. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to, you know, avoid what he knew was coming, which was perhaps his possible death.
He says, both of them say in that clip we just listened to, that they were determined to pull him out. And then later, Rhodes contradicts himself and says, like, oh, I thought it was just one of those, oh, hey, how you doing sort of things. That's why I didn't turn on my blue and red lights. You know,
officers are allowed to be given multiple days in which they're able to give their statement. And their statement is going to be based on what evidence is available, you know, that they know about, that's going to prove or disprove the story or the narrative that they want to put forth. And so, yeah, I mean, I get it. And so he's trying to put forth the officer friendly, you know, kind of persona when, you know, in fact, you know, officer friendly does not jump into the passenger side of, you know, a vehicle of someone who at least at that moment that they know of, hasn't broken a law, hasn't committed a felony, but, you know, so-called officer friendly has just jumped in a doggone car, as I guess we'll get to here shortly, and basically escalated the situation into something more than, you know, it had to be. And I really think that it testifies to their original intent. Their intent, as they said, was to pull this guy out because they had, you know, something to prove, or they had a score to settle with him, as obviously he knew. Something just came to mind. So I recall having a conversation with 4 members of law enforcement, one of which was white. The other 3 were black, and they talked about training. When they were trained by a veteran coming onto the force, and these officers of a different jurisdiction had informed me of how they were trained, and they were trained like this. When they would approach a vehicle like this, they would approach it and say, "Hey, how are you? I'm Officer so-and-so. Here's the reason why I stopped you, or here's the reason why I'm here." And then they would go on to de-escalate the situation by saying, "I don't care what you got in the car," or "I don't care about this," pretty much letting the person know that they're not on a fishing expedition. And by doing that, you have folks that will readily admit to whatever it is that they have, because they know that they're not about to get locked up and go to jail. You know what I mean? So it's like, look, so you're talking about an officer who comes and says, you know what? I don't know what else you have in the car, but I see that right there. I'm going to give you a ticket. And they could have accomplished it in that way. They could have just said, I see it. There's no denying it. We're going to give you a ticket. I'm not even, I'm just going to need to run you to make sure you are who you are. And then we're going to give you this ticket and we're going to be on our way. That is what law enforcement, looks like when it's not just about trying to prove a point, trying to basically beat up people into submission and just, breed fear. And also, that's the kind of that's what policing looks like in a police force, that it does not have the corrupt and the violent culture that a police force like Euclid has. One where on that manual, they've got that figure, beating the crap out of a citizen, saying, protecting the shit out of you. One of the things that we were aware of, from the beginning was that these officers were not wearing the usual police uniform. So they didn't have the shiny badge. They had the fatigue type clothing, like cargo pants, and they had the skull cap that may have possessed some type of badge or lettering that identified them as law enforcement. But at nighttime, thread and needlework are not shiny like an actual badge. And, to top it off, waking somebody up and, into a potentially dangerous situation, they might not notice all that stuff. But we're talking about at nighttime. The officer says he didn't have his lights on, things of that nature. So, we don't know or maybe they even had lights just shining in his face. I don't know what they had as far as flashlights. Like, with that understood, he doesn't know exactly, who they are or knowing that they might be law enforcement, knowing what we've seen go on around the country, what we've seen, as far as, many of us have experienced as far as law enforcement in general, they might have had nefarious intentions, period. And I think that my biggest concern would have been to get to a well-lit area where people were. And that could have very well been what his intentions were, because that's my thinking. When I get pulled over by law enforcement, I try to go into the biggest, most well-lit parking lot where I know that there are people.
And I came up at a higher angle, what I thought was a downward angle, and I fired again, and I saw that round go into his neck. When that round went into his neck, I could see he kind of loosened up. It definitely had an effect. He tried to say something, but no words came out. He did a half swing, but there was not much there. And then he just slowly started losing body function, and he was no longer doing anything. He was just slowly relaxing and falling over.
I'm done. I can't. I mean, this guy, it's like he's telling of a fucking lullaby or something. I mean, the ways, and I'm coming to the end of my story. Nowhere in there did I hear him say, I am going to, if you don't stop, I'm going to shoot you. Nowhere in there did I hear that. Maybe that would have had an effect. Maybe that would have elicited the type of response from Luke where Luke would have given some clarity as to what his intentions were. What that officer did, period, was place himself in a position to where he was going to be in what can be perceived as danger, a dangerous situation, which would then, according to his superiors, according to a court of law, as far as their track record, he'd be able to be found not guilty for whatever use of force he was going to use. That was, and I think that that's one of the biggest failures that we have within the criminal justice system, you know, just in how we govern the police is just how we don't put these clear-cut boundaries and guidelines for them in regards to how to engage the community, things to do and things not to do. Because once you start to go there, then culpability is so much easily, you know, you're able to figure that out, you know, but by leaving things vague, ambiguous, as they do, or just totally unaddressed, they always leave that door open. And I mean, and that's obviously by design. That him taking that tone when he's talking about, you know, taking someone's life, the process of someone just losing their life, you know, I don't think anybody else should take any comfort in, oh, he's just sounds pretty somber, he's taking this seriously or anything like that. That was so obvious. That was just for dramatic effect. That if he really gave a shit, he would have given him some kind of warning, and he wouldn't have even placed himself in that type of position, because you just don't force situations like that.
Well, he says he doesn't remember what he was saying. He only remembers the various ways in which he was assaulting Luke.
I mean, is that the kind of officer you want on your police force? One that's going to be blanking out? That's, you know, maybe he doesn't remember exactly what he said then because they didn't take a statement from him immediately after it happened, because they have a policy in which they wait before they get a statement from the officer. And the BS justification for that is that they need that time to be able to gather their thoughts. No, it's to get their story straight.
Later in the deposition, that's what Catalani says. It's like he kind of goes into like combat mode from the moment he knocks.
Yeah, there was definitely like this fixation. There was definitely this fixation on what they were going to do. It's almost like what you remember from junior high or high school, when it's like, you know, people are amping you up about, you know, a fight and what you're going to do, and and then you go and you set out to go do it. Everything else is a blur other than what your objective is. But if your objective was to engage this person, get them out of the car, talk them out of it, you know, something along those lines, then the focus would have been more so on the individual and not on an act. And the other thing that just came to mind that's a little unrelated, that's unrelated to Officer Catalani, but more so regarding Officer Rose, is the lack of forethought and to me, just any kind of intelligence, period, to be quite honest with you. Whose answer or response to stopping a car from crashing is to shoot the driver because I was scared of crashing? That was one of the things that I recall reading in his deposition, was that I want to stop the car. So I had to shoot him because I was worried about him crashing. Well, what he most assuredly did was ensure that the car was going to crash. And I don't know, it defies logic to understand and know that car kept slowing down. At any time he could have jumped out of that car. But that was not their objective. Their objective was to get him out of that car. Their objective was, to have some badass story to go back into the police station and be able to tell, because that is the culture that existed within that police department. And if that wasn't the case, then the chief would have saw fit to at least put him on administrative duty after it happened, give him administrative leave. But instead, they didn't do that because, that was just all in the line of duty. That was, great job, guys. I mean, as you saw in some of that city council footage, he was getting awards. He was getting accommodations. And, it's not just about Officer Matthew Rhodes. It's about the chief. It's about that the mayor. It's about, that entire police force and the complicit the administration that allows for that dangerously abusive police force to even exist.
A little bit confusing for me because Catalani got a commendation. They didn't say Rhodes' name, but Rhodes was standing up there with everybody else.
Rhodes didn't even have a name tag on.
So what the hell was he doing there?
Well, he was there to get an award. And it had something to do with him, being a part of a high-speed chase and, getting some suspects that had gone into Cleveland. They had crossed, the border. But and so he was a part of that pursuit. And one of the things that I remember, they had officers out there that were going to be getting their accommodations. Some of their loved ones were out there. And I remember being approached by one of the members of the Stewart family, one of the members of Luke's family. And they said, I believe that's the officer right there. And she was talking about the officer behind me. And, I look back and of course I'm looking to see his name. And the first thing that I noticed was that unlike everybody else there, he didn't have his name right there on his, I guess what they'd call a Class A uniform or his dress blues. He didn't have it. He didn't have that name. And so then because I was now, alert to him possibly being that person. During that meeting, you'll see where they called him Officer Matthew. They did not call him Officer Rhodes. And they called him Officer Matthew. That was the confirmation for me. That's when I became livid. Well, you know what I mean? And I was boiling because that was the confirmation that was him. And if that was him, then they just gave a murderer an accommodation.
And in a way that it would not reflect necessarily on the record, or that it could be missed by the audience, or that was
so intentional. And just
Did you know that either of them would be honored at that meeting that you were at?
We didn't have a clue. Our intentions were to go to this meeting, as is, our intentions at any time. We want to elevate the voices of the family. We want to, amplify their voices, try to help them achieve, some of the goals in which they have, which is one, to get the city or get the chief to truly and honestly look into the matter, to get a dangerous officer off of the street, because this is not just about the family, but this is about other citizens, because you're talking about somebody who just took a life. You haven't even finished an investigation on it, but you're allowing them to patrol the streets, which shows you how little value they have regarding, the lives of the citizens that they know are going to be policed the most. And so, and obviously they didn't have a problem with what they did. I mean, we look in other professions like a doctor, and if a a doctor has done something that would be considered malpractice, or if a doctor has made some type of error, you know, they're not going to perform any more surgeries until till that doctor is checked out to make sure, or that they've looked into what happened during, you know, a procedure to make sure that everything is on the straight and narrow. But, you know, they don't even do that with law enforcement. You know, they just, oh, okay, we'll investigate it. And they let that officer just keep patrolling the streets. And they just place everybody in unnecessary risk. So BCI is the state's arm of investigating, law enforcement arm of investigating. And these investigators come in, and in this particular case, they came in and they investigated a police use of force incident that resulted in the loss of life of a citizen, and particularly Luke Stewart. And what they did was they investigated it, and the way that they presented it is that they said, hey, here's everything we looked at. This is what we found. This is the angle in which he was shot. This is how many times he was shot. You know, all that kind of stuff. They just present what happened. They give perhaps an idea of the order in which it happened, but they don't present any findings in regards of if the officer was justified in that homicide. And so once again, with those findings, you place it back into the hands of the city, which is like, you know, saying, okay, it's putting the fox in charge of the hen house. In essence, that's what it is. So you're talking about basically, hey, we investigated you, take this and do with it what you will. It's one of the mechanisms that I believe is in place to keep things the way that they are. I liken it to an investigation even that can come from a local prosecutor's office. The local prosecutors will sit back and do an investigation, but then it's all in how they present it to the grand jury, you know, whether or not they want that person to be indicted or not. And so, or finding a person guilty. So I just look at it in the same way that there are systems in place to make sure that we continue to find members of law enforcement and other bad actors, to find them not guilty, or to find them where there'll be a no bill indictment on them. So they never, there's not any accountability. And like, that's the system that we have. And those are some of the things we need to address if we're ever going to get a change in our current situation.
What I noticed from listening to several of these interviews is the last who, what, where, and when, but they rarely ask why.
They do it it shows you who they're really there for. If I am on trial, if my defense attorney knows that those, if he asks those questions and those questions are going to make me look guilty or are going to show my guilt, my attorney is not going to ask those questions. And so when you see an investigator, a prosecutor, someone from the prosecutor's office, folks that are supposed to be investigating something, and they're supposed to be either impartial or they're supposed to be investigating things in the interest of the citizens, they show their true allegiance. And their allegiance is to law enforcement. That's a part of that culture. And so, of course, they're going to do what's best for their client because that officer is their client, period. There was an incident. So first off, there's a skating rink that had a tradition of throwing, a end of the school year bash for the students that of the city of Euclid, Playmore skating rink. And this particular year, there was a call made or calls made by residents to law enforcement about a large gathering of people in the Euclid skating rink or at this Euclid skating rink. And you have to understand that, how someone like me views this. We live in a country where during the days of Jim Crow, and that city of Euclid very much misses the days of Jim Crow because it's still very segregated. But you couldn't have, more than 2 Black people congregate in an area. That's why they created loitering laws, things of that nature, so that they can police Black people justifiably and kind of keep them underfoot, and also to be able to make them a part of the convict lease system, put them in prisons. And keeping with those old, long-standing traditions, I really feel that these folks that called Euclid PD saw a bunch of Black people. They immediately got nervous, and Euclid PD being, keeping up with that same Jim Crow tradition, to uphold systemic and societal racism, they came full force. They showed up, they got out of their vehicles, they got out with their shotguns in hand. They were walking around, to intimidate young people. So we're talking about young people, hormonal young people who, while hormonal, are also intelligent enough to know when something is wrong. And so you're talking about them knowing that there's an unnecessary show of force. They're not being given the same courtesies that they've perhaps observed others have when they come into, large crowds, when it's not a crowd of white people. And so therefore, of course they're going to feel agitated. They're going to feel upset. They're going to be angry. And, as law enforcement knows, the same way that they may get this 30-minute course on de-escalation, that 30-minute course on de-escalation is also a 30-minute course on how to escalate, because you do the opposite of what you learn. And so they came out and they've got their guns out without consulting the staff, without going in and really looking to see what was going on the inside. Law enforcement that was there took it upon themselves to make this announcement that, hey, they were only going to let a select amount, and I'm sorry that I can't remember the number, but I believe they said something like they were going to only let another 100 or 50 people in. Well, when they did that, this long line of people, everybody starts jockeying, trying to get a better pole position, trying to get a better position in the line, because they wanted to be of those 100 people that were going to be allowed to come in. Now, you're talking about a skating rink that had the capacity to be able to hold over 400 people. Right. So the 400 people that could have been allowed to go in there, law enforcement didn't even know that they already could have allowed another 200 people or so in there. Why? Because they never consulted the staff. Why didn't they consult the staff? I'll let you draw your own conclusion. Well, maybe not. They did that because of the fact that it was a black establishment catering that particular night to black patrons, young black patrons. None of those demographics I just mentioned do they respect or hold any value for. And what they did, and so they didn't respect the patrons, they didn't respect the establishment, they didn't respect the people who worked there, so they didn't even consult them. They didn't know the numbers. So they basically created this situation where now there's this frenzy of folks rushing to the front of the line, trying to get a good spot. And of course, there's some pushing, some shoving. Now some fights break out. Now that's the pretense of which they're now going to shut it all down. And they were pepper spraying. Folks are, throwing up. There's chaos just on the inside where folks were, the lobby of the skating rink. And they're telling everybody they have to go. Now, law enforcement, they're bringing out their pepper spray paintballs that they use for crowd control. And, for these teenagers, for kids. And they created this volatile situation. They chose to now make it more volatile. And they're shooting at people. And there were accounts where they said that law enforcement was actually shooting people directly with these balls, with these pepper spray balls. Also, it's illogical for them to handle it like that, because you're talking about young people, many of whom not only didn't have a car, but didn't even have a driver's license. They got dropped off there by their parents. And so now here in the middle of the night, you're telling them, I don't know where you're going to go, but you're going to get the hell out of here. And they're sending these kids, they're telling them that you got to leave this property. Kids who are kids. Their parents dropped them off right there. They don't all have cell phones or, access to a cell phone. So how do they tell their parents where to come pick them up? I know that as a parent, when I know that something's going on somewhere, that's where I go to find my kid. And these kids know that their parents are going to come back there. So was their plan to now create an even bigger volatile situation by now sending hundreds of kids through the streets of Euclid who were upset, who were angry, who were scared, and just young hormonal kids, period. You know what I mean? And, to do that, feel betrayed by a community and feel betrayed by law enforcement. And so that was just showing how law enforcement did not care for them, but also did not care for the people that they were affecting. And, what I want to say, further, and, and I'll close on that, is this right here, is that from beginning to end, Euclid police created that situation. Law enforcement should have been there. They gave the impression to the owner that because he applied and requested that officers be present for that particular function, he did it in a timely manner. He was under the impression that they were going to be there, but they never came. Didn't give a reason why they didn't come. And once officers did arrive there, things were not disorderly. By making this announcement about how many folks were going to get in there, they created that situation along with officers having guns in their hands. And all of that, is just textbook case of how to create chaos and justify, use of force.
Well, didn't they also use that as an impetus in city council to try to get the roller rinks closed down?
Exactly. You know what I mean? Because you're talking about now, it's a way to make it a larger than life type, community nuisance. And which was, all that just shows that they had ulterior motives and as to why they weren't going to send those cops. You would think they'd be more friendly to a business establishment, but as I said, everyone involved they weren't of the right hue, period. BLM Cleveland, has been around. One of the two incidents that compelled us to come into being was, of course, the deaths of Tamir Rice, as well as the deaths of Timothy Russell and Melissa Williams. And, so we were already in existence. We had an incident involving, we had incidents rather, that happened in Euclid. And, we were compelled to come out and support the family of Luke Stewart and, to be able to amplify their voices, to help them get some justice, to help the local government to actually, take this seriously. But we wanted to, it was all about empowering the family because, any of us are just, one incident with police away from becoming the next hashtag. And so, we all have a sense of urgency. I know I certainly do, that every time I assist, a family, it's in my best interest to do so. So we try to show up in that capacity and, we helped the family. We showed up to city council meetings, to try to be a voice for and with the family. We showed up for that. We did canvassing, trying to find folks who might have seen something in regards to what happened to Luke Stewart. We even went to city council and actually tried to speak with the mayor as well as the chief to appeal to their sense of decency. And, none of it to any avail. The family of Luke Stewart, never really got a real apology. They never really got any, it was like, an acknowledgement of perhaps condolences, hey, but there was never an I'm sorry or anything like that. And, for us, that's what we're there for, not only to assist the family, but to validate their humanity because they're treated inhumanely. They're treated in a way that, it appears that, animals get more sympathy than the loss of a Black human life. Something happens to an animal, it'll, you're talking about a law getting changed and it's expedited, but here it is. Luke Stewart got murdered and we see everything that happened wrong with how that was handled. And no one was compelled to take any steps to make sure that nothing like that happened again. And so, when you're experiencing all that and you're seeing all of that, you start to lose your feeling of humanity. And BLM is here to say, hey, to the families, we see you, we love you, we're with you, we're bleeding too, we're crying too. And, and we're here for the long haul. And, we've continued an ongoing relationship with the Stewart family. I love Miss Mary. She's, a strong, awesome woman. I love Luke's sister, Tierra. I mean, Cleander, I love that whole family. They're just a strong, resilient family. I don't know how they're able to maintain the way that they are, but they're doing it. And, I just hope that one day they'll get some real justice. And unfortunately, at least like it's a harder thing to expect with a mayor and city council like they have in the city of Euclid. And it's a harder thing to expect from the current presidential administration if you got the DOJ in here to try to see if there was a constitutional violation, on the part of Luke Stewart's murder. So, but we're here for the family. We're here with the family, for the long haul. It makes one understand why we run. It makes one, when we look at what happened to him, when we look at what happened to Richard Hubbard, it makes you understand why we run. It makes you understand why some folks will fight back. It's like, if I'm going to get beat up anyway, I might as well not get beaten to a bloody pulp. But what you have are folks that are basically defending themselves or, against the officer, not on the offense, but just trying to stop from being pummeled. And, it's equally upsetting. And it's just one of those things where, I see from a bigger picture standpoint, I see grown men being emasculated. And these grown men who are being emasculated, it does something to the psyche and it makes them react differently when being confronted by law enforcement. And I think it takes away the right of law enforcement to be upset when they experience these different reactions that they get from people, because you can't whip my ass and think that I'm just going to accept that every time I have an encounter with you, even when I comply. You can't put me on the ground regardless of what I'm wearing, because perhaps I'm coming from work, perhaps I'm coming from an interview, but I'm wearing something decent. You can't make me get on the ground with those things and think that the next time that I have to deal with you, that I'm going to be okay with that. And you can't handcuff me, treat me like a criminal in front of my community, my neighbors, my children, my family, and things of that nature, and humiliate me for nothing, or because I had music playing loud and your response to that, for something that's just a matter of writing me a ticket or giving me a warning, that you treat me like I'm some hardened criminal that I just committed a first-degree felony. But for something that's very minuscule, if anything at all, that you take away my humanity, you humiliate me and emasculate me, and think that any and every other altercation, or not altercation, but interaction that I have with law enforcement after that it's going to be a good one. It's not. A lot of damage has been done, and you can't place the onus upon us to just fix it or undo it. The onus is on law enforcement because they created that dynamic. Euclid's culture, police culture, is just totally messed up, and, it's not going to change until there are steps or things in place that are going to bring about, some real accountability. So, we can talk about the many things that's wrong, from the fact that officers have the opportunity to wait so long before they make a statement, after a use of force incident, that it allows them to get their story straight and figure out what the general public knows or will have access to, so that they are not seen lying, and they could present, this narrative that's going to keep them from getting into trouble. I mean, it's having, laws that govern the usage of body cams, where it's mandated, and if they cut them off or they don't cut them on, that it's an offense. If it's something that it's obvious that they obscured the view of the body cam or dash cam, or they cut it off, that it's actually a tampering with evidence charge. It's things like that. Like there are steps like that, but I'll be quite honest with you. One of the ways in which, or the two things that I think could be done that would just immediately change the culture and all of those things would just fall into place is, one, make law enforcement get liability insurance. Each officer have liability insurance. If you do that, that takes that burden off of a cowardly police chief or mayor or city council person. That takes that responsibility off them for pushing for the dismissal of this officer, because now these officers, when they commit these things, their insurance goes up. And so when their insurance goes up, they can't afford to maintain that. So they fire themselves. They quit. When you have something like that, you have an insurance agency, the company, they bring in what they call best practices. It's much easier for law enforcement to accept what they call best practices coming from an insurance agency than from a member of the community to say, hey, this is what you need to do. They're going to raise hell and say, you don't know anything about policing. I'm putting my life on the line. But guess what? When that insurance agency comes in and says, hey, these are the things you can do to keep your insurance down. So when you do stop, don't immediately pull the person out of the car. When you do a stop, make clear to the person that you're stopping the reason why you're stopping them, and what your intentions are with regard to the stop. When you do things like that, it basically creates a certain comfort that this officer pulled me over for this reason, and it's not going to lead to something else. And that's a best practice. And so that's better coming from an insurance provider that's saying, we're doing this if you want to keep your price, your payments down. They're going to do it because you're hitting them in the pocketbook. You're hitting them in their wallet. And I think that, if they don't understand it, and we've already seen that they're not going to understand that they should do it as a matter of decency and morality, just doing the right thing, then they're going to do it because it is the most feasible thing for them to do economically. And that's a way in which you could change that culture. That's a way in which the administration up to this point that's been complicit and cowardly, in all of this, it gives them a way out. So it's like, it's just a matter of money. So I think that's one of the ways, or that's a way. But the other thing is when they have an instance where they fired a bad officer like Officer Amiot, and then they have to bring them back. What a lot of people don't understand is that when we talk about these collective bargaining agreements, we're talking about the failure of a city to negotiate favorable terms for their residents. They're more worried about officers than they are their residents. And so if the city went in there with good intentions to actually negotiate a better contract for the residents, then you would not have things that existed within the collective bargaining agreement that allowed binding arbitration and things of that nature. And that's one of our biggest problems, because binding arbitration is what oftentimes, when a bad officer is fired, that's what helps them get their job back. And so, I put the onus on the city. They just need to negotiate, better terms in the collective bargaining agreement. And if they don't like it, those officers can just go somewhere else, because they would be pleasantly surprised to see that a lot of officers would stay and other officers would want to come and work there if if a lot of officers quit as a result of the terms changing within the collective bargaining agreement. But,